Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for taking the time. We're just going to give 2 more minutes for everyone else to join. Then we're going to be able to start. Good evening, everyone, and thank you once again for taking the time to join us today on this exciting conversation. My name is Moeketsi Koahela. I'm the chairlady for Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce Youth Commission. And on the call with me, we have the chair of the Y20 and also the chair of South African BRICS Youth, and the chief of the Y20 SA. And then we also have Margaret Modife, who's the vice chair. Margaret, I will hand over to you so that you can just give us a bit of an overview regarding why are we here today, and then we'll be able to then kick off.
All right, thank you, Nonjabulo, and good evening to everyone on the platform. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us today. So today's information session is a collaboration between the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce and Industry Commission, the Youth Commission, the South African BRICS Youth Association, as well as Y20 SA. We found it very important for young people to come together and have a conversation about what is the significance of South Africa's G20. And as a young person, what does it mean to us? How do we contribute? And most importantly, as we will be handing over the chairship rather to the USA, what does that mean for a young person in South Africa carrying that over? So in terms of our program, it's quite exciting. We have the Y20 South Africa chair, who is Mr. Raymond Matlala, as well as Mr. Moeketsi Koahela, who is the Y20 SA co-chair, and they will be giving us their expert knowledge as well as experience in terms of the process. So they will just explain further on what is Y20, but how does it feed into the overall G20 presidency under South Africa. So just in terms of the etiquette, please ensure that you are all muted. And after the two presenters have spoken, we'll then have a discussion, and you're more than welcome to then make contributions. Just ensure that you raise your hand and we will acknowledge you. With that being said, you are all welcome, and I will hand back to you, Nonjabulo.
Thank you so much, Margaret. So Raymond, we're going to start with you, just to give us an overview of what is the G20, what is the Y20, why is this significant for South Africa, and just give us an overview of what exactly it is in terms of the G20 and the Y20.
Thanks, Nonjabulo. Good evening to colleagues on the platform. I'm happy to be here. As Y20 South Africa, we've taken a very firm stand this year of radical inclusiveness of the process. For the first time in history, the Y20 has reached all 9 provinces in South Africa this year. The Y20 has had over 10,000 reach of audience, and that is direct audience, of course, due to the fact that we took this firm stance around radical inclusiveness. Look, G20 is a group of countries with the African Union and the European Union as part of the bloc. So previously, as many of you might be aware, maybe just a little bit of history, the G20 was established in 1999, and its role and its purpose was really around the financial collapse and the economic crisis of the world. So the first set of meetings were, or rather involved just the ministers of finance as well as the governors of central banks. In South Africa, you'd call it the Reserve Bank. Some call it the central banks. And subsequently, in 2008, the G20 then expanded into now including meetings of the heads of states and other government officials. And in 2010, the Y20 then hosted, or rather was established with its first summit in 2010. So Y20 becomes the oldest engagement group of the G20. So now with that expansion, how the G20 is configured is that there is the Sherpa track, there is the finance track, and there's engagement groups. With the finance track, as I've explained before, it is the ministers of finance with the governors or heads of central banks that lead that component. And the Sherpa track is led by the South Africa's Sherpa or a country's Sherpa. In our case, the Sherpa for G20 is the DG of Department of International Relations and Corporations, Mr. Zane Dango. Now, with that, it now introduced the Sherpa track, where now the Sherpa kind of plays a chief negotiator role, a secretariat role, where the heads of states then becomes the chair for that platform. And they've then introduced engagement groups. Currently, there are 13 officially recognized engagement groups, and Y20 is part of that. So there's W20, which is Women's 20, T20 Think Tank, B20 Business 20. India, during its presidency, introduced the SU Startup 20, there's Parliament 20, there's Labour 20, there's Science 20. There's a lot of 20s, right? But there's officially 13 official engagement groups, and Y20 falls within that official engagement group, which is, again, the first ever engagement groups to be launched by G20. And that was because of young people were asking for space in that particular grouping. In 2023 again, so the why is called the G20 is that it consisted of 19 countries, developed and developing countries around the world, with the European Union as part of the grouping as a bloc or as a region, making it a group of 20. Now, 2023 again, African Union was also admitted as a full member of the G20. It did not change the name to G21, but currently there are 19 member states and then the two regional blocks, which is the European Union and the African Union. But the name remains the same, similar to BRICS, where there's a BRICS expansion, and it's not even BRICS Plus, but it still remains BRICS as an official name of the bloc. So G20 is also a bloc. And maybe how G20 work, it does not have a secretariat. So a lot of multilateral platforms have got secretariats, but G20 does not have a secretariat. It works on a Sherpa model. The chair of that particular year becomes the presiding officer, or rather the head of states. The head of state of that country which is chairing becomes the presiding officer over the agenda of the G20 in consultation with the other member states.
All right. No, thanks, Raymond, for that overview. I think it actually sets the scene in terms of us understanding as to what exactly the G20 is and where the Y20 was actually incorporated and why it was incorporated. So maybe the next question would be around, if you could give us maybe what are some of the key priorities that South Africa has championed during its presidency, which have received overwhelming support from the member states?
Yeah, look, I mean, there's quite a number of things, but when you look at now, because of high-level deliverables for South Africa. And there's three of them, with an addition of the fourth one, which I'll reflect on it just shortly. So it's inclusive economic growth, industrialization, employment, and reduced inequality. The second one is food security. You may know, I mean, during Brazilian's chairship, Brazil has pushed the issue of food security and fighting hunger around the globe. And that's basically that. And the other thing is artificial intelligence, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. So these are the three high-level deliverables that South Africa aims to come out of the G20 process, having to achieve or deliver this at the practical level. What South Africa has also, or rather what is proposing, is the establishment of the Cost of Capital Commission during its presidency. And the Cost of Capital Commission really looks into debt, particularly for the continent. As you may know, many of you would know that the continent is over indebted to your global development banks, or what we call your financial institutions, your IMF, World Bank, even to some level of extent, member states some countries who actually borrow borrow African nations money. So this Cost of Capital Commission will look into some of the solutions of reducing Africa's debt, so that the funds should not go into servicing debt, but other social programs. And lastly, that I want to mention, so Brazil introduced what we call the G20 Social Summit in its presidency last year. And that was a kind of a way of getting the voices of civil society into the G20 processes in a more cohesive way. As you may know, the G20 engagement groups, 13 of them, they've got all their processes, all their focused areas, task force, priorities. But the G20 Social Summit then incorporates everyone, including those that are not part of the G20 engagement groups, those that are civil society organizations, both in globally, domestic, grassroots organizations. So it includes all of that. Just to say, last year during the President's chairship, the G20 Social Summit had 9 policy recommendations. And out of the 9, 6 were adapted into the Leaders' Declaration. So South Africa has taken the same route of now having government and civil society having to sit in one room and discussing what are some of the challenges and what are some of the priorities and policy recommendations that will then be submitted to President Ramaphosa during the closing of the G20 Social Summit. So those are the kind of priorities for South Africa's presidency for 2025 around G20.
All right. No, and engaging civil society is quite important. I mean, because we need individuals that are on the ground who are experiencing the challenges to actually advocate and speak to the challenges they are experiencing on a day-to-day. So I like that approach also in terms of how South Africa was able to copy and paste what Brazil was doing. So what can be done, to sustain youth participation and ensure continuity after South Africa hands over the presidency?
Well, that's a very interesting question, because that's something that I think as Y20 collectively we've been battling with, right? We find ourselves having to in a crossroads, and I'll explain why. As I've indicated before, Y20 is the oldest engagement group. This year, during South Africa's presidency, for Y20, it celebrates 15 years of existence. Now, let's take these 15 years. So in these 15 years, Y20 has issued 14 communiques. A communique is an official document which is handed over to the presidency from engagement groups, which then leads into the development of the declaration if the inputs finds its expression there. Now, 2 things happened in the last 14 years, right? The first thing is none of the policy recommendations that Y20 has ever proposed explicitly find expression in the Leaders' Declaration. The second thing is in over 400 policy recommendations that Y20 has proposed in the last 14 years, none of them have been implemented. Lastly is there is no continuity in Y20. G20 also operates at a tracker level, a tracker model, sorry. So the tracker simply means that the country who chaired last year, the current country, and the countries chairing next year. So in our case, the tracker is Brazil, South Africa, and the United States. It works in other engagement groups. It works in the Sherpa track and the finance track, but it's not effective in Y20 as an engagement group. And what we've now been trying to do is to introduce a permanent mechanism in the form of a secretariat, in the form of a council, in the form of any terminology that is acceptable by member states, to say, let us introduce this permanent mechanism to do precisely 3 things. To ensure continuity of Y20, to ensure the implementation of the policy recommendations, and to report annually in terms of tracking what has been implemented, what has not been implemented from the previous presidency on an annual basis during the Y20 summit. However, there were a lot of pushback from some of the member states, and that did not find expression. And because of that, it led to where we are now. And I'll speak to this quite shortly. But what I'm saying is that there's a need for a permanent mechanism which is collectively led and consensus and has got consensus-driven approach. In a form of a G20 grouping, works on consensus, mutual respect, and all of that. We ought to find those balances within the Y20 as well. Because a lot of engagement groups and even at the Shepherd tracker level, as it's working well, in our space as Y20 is not working well, and hence we're proposing this. They engagement groups such as your T20, B20, W20. These are engagement groups that have about 10 years of existence. I mean, 5 years after the Y20, but have made substantial progress. Maybe let me leave out B20 because the sentiment would be, no, they have money, they can do anything. Let's take T20 and W20. A similar grouping as our civil society led, but they've done exceptional work, and there's level of continuity from that. So we need to create this continuity. However, that did not go as planned. But what we have taken as a resolution from a South African perspective is to establish the Y20 Alumni Association. And we call it an association because we want people to be associated with the process. It's not just an organization, but it's a process that will then take South Africa and South African youth to get involved, more involved, better than this year, through the Y20 processes in the coming years. As we hand over to the United States, there's so much uncertainty around what engagement groups would be officially taking part during the US presidency. Should Y20 become one of those engagement groups, what will then happen is that the Y20 process, the Y20 South Africa delegation will come out of that particular alumni association. We've also created 2 legacy projects, which we will announce at the G20 Social Summit from 18th to 20th at Birchwood during the Y20 official side event of the G20 Social Summit. Those 2 legacy projects. But the Alumni Association, the plans are underway, and everything will be finalized. And every South African and African youth will have a sense of belonging towards the Alumni Association. Thank you.
Thanks, Raymond. So just to pick your brain a little bit further, I mean, you mentioned that the Y20 was established way before the B20. What are they doing right? And you mentioned a very critical point regarding we always want to use money as an excuse, but what are the frameworks that they've put in place that are working that we could probably copy and paste within the Y20 to just ensure sustainability for the future?
So if you look at, although B20 also this year has proposed a permanent structure, but they've always been, the tracker model has also worked well. I mean, they're working very well with the Brazil and United States as the tracker as we speak. They've got ample support from the United States for that matter, United States business. So that coordination effort and continuity effort is one that we should strive for. But if you look at also, T20 similar model, W20 similar model, C20 has developed, or rather has established in 2020, has established the Advisory Council, International Advisory Council. A different mechanism, although it's advisory and it can take decision, can only advise, but at least even through that process, there is a level of continuity. For example, when we were discussing with the C20 organizers of Brazil last year, they told us what are some of their learnings, what worked and what did not work, best practices, the number of working groups, what was feasible and what was not feasible, and so forth and so on. Those are kind of the discussions and the frameworks we need to put in place as Y20 to be able to be effective.
All right, that makes sense. So getting the right kind of support and having the right frameworks to establish sustainability for Y20 is something that you guys are working on, if that's something I heard correctly on your side as well.
It would only be effective if it's adapted at the member states level. At the moment, it's not adapted at the member state level, and we're working towards that. It's a process. But at least from a domestic point of view, which is Africa and South Africa, we're working on this alumni association mechanism.
Oh, okay. So my last question then to you, Raymond, regarding the Y20 didn't come out of the summit with a communique. Can you take us through the significance of this and what it means in terms of the process?
Yeah, no thanks. So for many people, right, and that has been the, sorry, there's some, okay, there's some background noise from someone. I don't know.
Apologies. I'm trying to track the individuals down here on my side. Please, can you guys go on mute if you join in? We will open the floor for questions once we're done with the dialogue.
Thanks. So many people think the communique as a success of the summit. But we have always taken a stance that the summit is only the start of the work. And we have always taken or viewed this as a process. Now, when we took this stance, it made a lot of people angry. Some people even cried. But I must also say, it was also a very difficult decision for us to take as the Y20 South Africa leadership. I remember there was silence for about 10 minutes in the room after the meeting was adjourned, and people started crying. Some people even said, and I'm talking about, ordinary delegates after the effect, that they've spent months preparing for this and they've spent a lot of money coming to Y20, to South Africa. And my response was, for Y20 South Africa alone this year, we spent close to 10 million on the process. Now you want to cry and tell me that you've spent 20,000 to come here and therefore we shouldn't have taken the decision that we've taken. So the significance of this process is that for the first time, there's no communique. And the reason is because we're tired of talk show. We're tired of symbolic communiques. We're tired of ceremonial communiques. We spent 10 million to talk show, as I've explained in my previous discussion, that 14 communiques were issues. None of them have found expression. That's the first thing. The second thing is none of the over 400 policy recommendations from those communiques have ever been implemented. So why would you then want to say not having a communique is a failure? In fact, having a communique which becomes meaningless, it's a failure to us. And that is why we said, if we cannot commit to a permanent mechanism of ensuring continuity, implementation, and tracking, as South Africa, we cannot endorse a communique that seeks to have a meaningful impact after the summit. And that's where we are. And that's the decision, a very difficult but yet necessary decision to take. And I can tell you now that, in the last 2 months, as we were engaging with a number of stakeholders, we've been applauded for this decision. It is only now that people see the impact of the decision that we made. And during the G20 Social Summit, we're still going to advocate for the institutionalization and mainstreaming of youth within the G20 platforms. We've invited over 450 delegates from across the continent, globe, and South Africa in all the provinces to ensure that the voices of youth in the G20 Social Summit, it's also recognized as part of the mainstreaming and institutionalization of the Y20 process.
Raymond, I mean, it's interesting for the fact that if there were so many communiques that were done previously, and none of them were actually implemented. It was quite a bold thing for the South African president, South African Y20, seem to say and make that decision. And of course, receiving a lot of backlash, right? And you've made a valid point regarding the amount of money that has been spent on Y20, and yet having an individual or individuals complaining about the money they spent just to be able to travel probably to SA for to join these conversations. So how have you guys been able to actually ensure that making this decision is the right decision for South Africa as part of the presidency? And what are you guys doing to ensure that you implement some of the things that you are trying to ensure that with the presidency, when it comes to South Africa and the Y20, the things that you commit to are going to be implemented since you've taken this bold step?
Yeah, look, as I said, right, it has to be a member state driven and a consensus driven approach. At the moment, we don't have consensus on the implementation of these policy recommendations. However, we have what we call a draft zero of the communique, which has got red lines that we were supposed to have been discussing with the heads of delegations. And using that document, there's a lot that came out of that document. And one of the legacy programs, as you may know, some of these policy recommendations are practical, some are policy driven. So we are going to be innovation hub as part of one of the legacy programs. We're also going to be announcing the Y20 Leadership Academy as part of that program. Now, the Alumni Association, as it sits and starts to bring in members, we are then going to work towards those policy recommendations and advocate using through different platforms. Not so, for example, if you're speaking about issues related to business, members with you and agencies would use for the establishment of the global mechanism. But the other thing is that we've been in teaching an official side event at UNGA, UN General, really rally behind the approach that we've taken. A number of government officials in different departments that will rally behind this. Even the G20 Social Summit itself rallies behind these decisions because it was I think it was a necessary decision to have been taken. But what I'm trying to say is that we at least have support, even from some of the member states, in particular the BRICS member states supported this motion, except for the new entrants, Indonesia. But all the other BRICS member states that are part of the G20 member states supported this approach. What then we'll do is also to issue joint statements around issues where the consensus was reached around, and that is the discussions we've had with what we call the friendly countries.
All right. No, thank you, Raymond. Moeketsi, we are moving to you, and now your turn on the hot seat. And the one question I have for you firstly is, what is the significance of South Africa holding the G20 presidency, both for the country and for the rest of the African continent?
Thank you so much, Program Director. Just to confirm, am I audible?
Yes, you are.
Thank you so much. No, I mean, I think, Program Director, the significance of South Africa's G20 presidency has also been, I think, underscored and also just highlighted by our Y20 chair, Mr. Raymond. I think for me, the first one would really have to be, when you're looking at, the themes that we had chosen as a country with our chairmanship and the presidency of the G20, I mean, solidarity, equality, and sustainable, development, I really think, that also speaks to not only our international posture when it comes to, our foreign policy, but also I think, the South African way of being, right? To say that, yes, we may be considered to be, I think a big brother in the continent, but also we are one of the countries that really plays a huge role when it comes to, the global south, but also I think the ways in which we advocate for our foreign, policy posture, right, rooted in Ubuntu. And I think you find it in those three themes around solidarity, equality, and sustainability. And I think, the second one, Program Director, that really makes our G20 chairmanship and presidency quite significant is really around, the fact that, I mean, the world's attention has been on us, right? And the question is, what are we then going to do with this world's attention, international media as well, that's been on us? And I think, as a country with our presidency, we've demonstrated discipline, but also we've also just demonstrated how, as we're not just, a fish in the pond, right? But really, ours as a country, we have a big role to play. Even, not only as a developing country, but I think we've shown that, we can hold our own in the world. But also I think for the African continent, what we must also take into consideration that, and really appreciate, is that South Africa's G20 presidency and chairmanship is really, has also been seen or perceived to be Africa's, G20 presidency, right? And I think even for us, within the Y20 engagement group, I mean, when you look at our working group members, and you're looking and you're extrapolating that data and you're looking at where the young people are from, most of them are from, some of the member countries in the African Union, right? In addition to the fact that, even the AU itself, as an international forum in this continent, multilateral forum that is, would have sent, its own delegation. So I think for us, those are two key, significant moments that I would point to. And the fact that, I think, as the chairperson said earlier on, how we made sure that, for example, even for us as the Y20, we move from, exclusivism to inclusivism, right? To make sure that civil society plays a role, not only in, as young people, but broadly, right? And I think because that is the robust nature of also our country, right? Where civil society has played an active role, both in the days of apartheid, but also in this 31 years of democracy. So that's where I think our significance has really been. Program Director?
No, thank you, Moeketsi. And you raise a very valid point. I think I remember even in 2010 when we were hosting the World Cup, we were very inclusive in terms of understanding that we're representing Africa, not just South Africa as a country.
No,
The
definitely.
approach that you guys have taken is quite a significant one. And just to ask regarding then, how were you guys also then managing regarding the challenges, were these South Africa specific challenges, or were you looking at as a whole? Mentioned that you've had several individuals part of Y20 that were part of the member states as well. How was that approach then taken?
Well, for us, in terms of the approach with regards to individual versus organizational participation, or even member countries and so on, I mean, I think, firstly, it's important to note that, I mean, when we would have released the call for, to say, young people, the Y20 is here, this is your moment as young people to lead, in these multilateral processes and engage with the powers that be. For us, in terms of our expression of interest, we gave young people an option to say, you can participate in this Y20, whether as an individual young person or as an organization that represents, a wider ecosystem of youth networks that you're in, right? So that is really how we went about that approach. It wasn't really challenging per se, because I do think there was interest, and we saw that, young people really, also themselves would have, read about the G20, or would have known that, this presidency is coming to South Africa, and how do we engage with it, right? And those who didn't know, I think part of what we did as well as this Y20 was to make sure that we make them, we come up with, what does a civil society outreach program look like, right? I think the main challenges, program director, would have to be on logistics, of course, right? I think the chair earlier on would have noted, the costing that, that would have cost us as this Y20 to organize our summit, but also even our pre-summit, right? So I think some of the challenges were around logistics and so on. But I think it's challenges, these logistical challenges that I'm also referencing, I think for me it shows you, and in fact they advocate and justify why, for example, as a continent, what would it look like to, if we all had one passport, right? Where we don't have to jump so many through administrative hurdles in order to get from one African country to the other, right? In terms of South African geography, I mean, apartheid spatial legacy is still a thing, right? Where it's still difficult to mobilize young people and organize young people, even in our country, because of, the different spatial planning that we have and the legacies of the past, government, spatial planning. So I think for us, those would really be the challenges around, logistical challenges, but as a consequence of, geography and spatial planning, right? We didn't really experience much challenges when it came to organizing these young people in the African continent, but also I think as well in our G20 member countries. I think young people have been quite eager, quite keen, and saying, we are here, we are ready to participate, and we're also ready to make our meaningful contribution in this multilateral table that we get to call the G20.
No, thanks, Moeketsi. So Raymond has also given us a quite extensive explanation regarding the challenges that they faced in terms of ensuring that some of the commitments and what their goals they were trying to achieve, and the support that is required to do so. But with that said, is there any legacy projects that are going to be championed by the Y20, South Africa specifically?
No, for sure. And I think the chairperson would have also, highlighted this in terms of, our Y20 Alumni Association. And by the way, even the Y20 Alumni Association, we had different modalities of doing it, right? So we said we can either go through a Y20 Alumni Association route, or even go through maybe, a Shepherd Council. So the name didn't matter, right? But what really mattered for us was to say, we need to start thinking about how do we institutionalize ourselves as young people. And again, Raymond would have also given examples around how the B20 has done it, how the C20 has done it, to an extent, even how the W20 has done it. And the positive, effects of that institutionalization is that, one, we're able to track progress, right? We're able to say, we met in South Africa 2025 during their G20 presidency. These are the commitments we made in terms of climate change. These are the commitments we made when it comes to addressing issues of, inclusive economic growth and employment. What does it look like? And so on, right? As informed by our thematic areas and what we would have negotiated into going into those negotiation rooms, right? And these are the sticky points. This is where we didn't meet each other. Let's go back to these points, right? So for us, really, the legacy project is this alumni association where we are envisioning institutionalizing the Y20, but also program director, the institutionalization of the Y20 is also about saying a young person from an informal settlement, from an indigenous community, from suburbia, the inner city, and what, this institutionalization mechanism will also come up with key programs, right? Whether it's in the form of an academy or civil society outreach programs in the form of facilitated workshops around multilateralism, South Africa's posture. The topics can vary, right? And they can be different, right? And they can be bold and creative. So for us, really, this institutionalization is about saying young people are serious when we are saying we want to be on the table. Because, certainly, program director, I mean, you would know how, for example, us particularly in the global south, right? I mean, you would see how we've been marked by waves of citizen protests, right? That have really just, have redrawn, the contours of really civic and political imagination, right? Whether we are talking about the Arab Spring to the Fees Must Fall protests, but we've seen how, for example, youth-led movements in particular have really served as both the moral compass, but also, that catalytic force of democratic renewal, constitutional policy, but also institutional and leadership changes. So for us, really, this Y20 Alumni Association is to say we are seeing the challenges that young people have spoken to in this particular continent, but also in the member countries, right? Your Latin America's countries like Brazil, right? Even to an extent to the US, where that country is now seeing, right, the taste of what would it look like to be in an authoritarian regime and what needs to change, right? Where does the center hold, if it needs to hold, right? So for us, this alumni association is that legacy project to say that this good work that we've done, the tireless hours, the nights, the days, the long hours, we cannot let them just, go off like that and let them burn like that, right? We can't let them go to waste. So how do we make sure that we use this alumni association to really, at the core of it, serve the young people who don't even necessarily even know about these opportunities, such as, the G20, the different social tracks, and all those things? How do we bring it to the people who I think are its key custodians, and something that we as Y20 have understood very well, right? Hence, the chair would have also noted, that civil society outreach work that we've done across all the 9 provinces of this country to say whether you know about this or not, the Y20 or not, but it's our business as the people leading it to make sure that you know about it. Program Director?
No, thank you, Moeketsi. That's such a great overview. So the last question that I have for you is regarding, especially, it's a bit of a sticky one, so bear with us. So we just want to understand, how does the G20 presidency tie into South Africa's national development goals or broader agendas, such as the African Union's Agenda 2063 and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals?
Thanks, Program Director. It is a sticky one, and I mean, I'll start with our own, national blueprint, rather, in terms of the NDP. I mean, when you look at the NDP and right now, some of the when there's been work around reviewing the National Development Plan 2030 of South Africa, right, where when you look at that document, it's a beautifully written document, right? And the question are, what has been implemented and what has not been implemented, right? And yes, in our country, we've got the Department of Monitoring and Evaluation and so on. And we applaud the work that they've also done to track progress. But again, it doesn't take, a 1-minute drive or a drive to Diepsloot, a drive to, Winterveld in Pretoria, a drive to Alexander in Johannesburg, a drive to Lehigh in the south of Johannesburg, or deep rural KZN or Eastern Cape, to know that, unfortunately, the implementation of our National Development Plan has not been adequately, implemented. And of course, much can be said about some of the commissions. Well, blame, or rather the root cause can be, sought in the different commissions that we've implemented as a country, right? So for us, even as this G20 presidency, it's, I think for me, at the core of the G20 presidency is also about policy, right? That formal and informal dialogue, right? But also, Program Director, it's also about implementation, right? Because also, when you're looking at even, the SDG 2030, the United Nations, Sustainable Development Goals, when you look at how far we are with those, you know that we are lagging behind. And part of the lagging behind is that, there isn't often what young people are saying. We don't have political will. And that is why young people are taking to the streets to say, if you don't have this political will, we will make you have this political will, right? And the third one, when I look at, AU Agenda 2063, again, that is a beautiful document that was really spearheaded by the former AU chairperson, who also happens to be, from this country, Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma, right? Who said that, young people, let's talk about what is the kind of, future. What kind of world will we be living in, in the African continent by 2063? And already research is already indicating to us that by 2050, if not 2063, right? In fact, by 2050, 1 in 4 people in the world will be African, right? Which is to say that, 1 in 4, so in essence, whilst populations in the global north are growing old, in fact, us as the African continent, we are growing young. And therefore, again, for me, I call for what does a review of the AU Agenda 2063 look like, right? Because again, when you're looking at the AU 2063, blueprint or agenda, there are 7 goals there, right? Or 7 aspirations rather. And each of those aspirations has a particular goal. And there's one aspiration that focuses particularly on saying, how do we capacitate our women, youth, persons with disabilities to make sure that they're able to live in that world that will be complex, multifaceted, some call it a VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, right? So for us, program director, it's about also how do we set our young people up for success, not only in terms of policy creation, but also policy implementation, because I do think across all those 3 documents that you've highlighted, right, really what we need is implementation, right? If the powers that be cannot implement, we as the young people are here. We are ready. We can implement. What do you need help with, right? As the powers that be, because certainly the energy of the young people of this country, but also in the continent, whether you're looking at Mozambique in Cabo Delgado, whether you're looking at the DRC, whether you're looking in Kenya, whether you're looking in Nigeria, whether you're looking even in the Sahel region, wherever you're looking, or the northern countries, young people have got energy. Really, all we're asking for is give us a seat at the table. And again, the seat at the table doesn't have to be exclusive. It can very much be intergenerational, because certainly we are young people who recognize the importance of the past, the present, and certainly the future, and how all of us, in these different generations coming together meaningfully so, can actually implement these things and actually get this continent working, right? Working for all its citizens and populations, but also communities. Because if we don't, the movements that I made example to earlier on, again, we saw what happened in this country in July 2021, right? And we don't want a repeat of that. Certainly the people will take to the streets, and we know the dire consequences, right, of people taking to the streets, right? The destruction of property and the many other, social ills that we'll be faced with. So for us, it's quite important that all these key documents, not only we review them in terms of monitoring and evaluation, but the things that we could not achieve, what hope is there still? What is the chance that we still have in these periods that these documents, policy documentations have given themselves, so that we can then start implementing, and young people, in particular, but also persons with disabilities, I would say, and women, right? People who are often most marginalized in across the globe, right? When you're looking at stats, their lives can really flourish and serve all of us.
No,
Program director?
Moeketsi, you've mentioned for the fact that as young, yes, can you hear me, Moeketsi?
I can hear you. Apologies.
Can you? Okay, no worries. So I'm saying thank you for that, and you are 100% correct. As young people, we need to really stand up and take baton and take initiative and take control of the narrative. We can no longer sit on the sidelines and expect everybody else to do something. So I like what you were saying, and taking that responsibility back to us as young people. So Raymond and Moeketsi, thank you so much for giving us such a beautiful overview of what the Y20 and G20 is, how we can get involved, opportunities are available, and what the purpose is. So I will open the floor for questions. You can just raise your hand. We'll to take questions from there. Yeah, Betso, I see you. You can go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Mr. Moeketsi has stated that South Africa has highlighted solidarity and sustainability as its key themes. So how will these commitments be institutionalized or handed over so that the incoming presidency does not start from scratch?
Raymond and Moeketsi, will you be able to please provide an answer to Giabeto's question? Giabeto, maybe I can ask you to please repeat your question.
I said that Mr. Moeketsi has stated that South Africa has highlighted solidarity and sustainability as its key themes. So how will these commitments be institutionalized or handed over so that the incoming presidency does not start from scratch?
No, thank you, Kiabet. So, I mean, I think for us, part of the handover will be in, as would have been noted, by our chairperson, but also in some of the questions and the queries that have been posed, is that, whilst we didn't come out with an official communique, but, we were afforded an opportunity to do a chair's summary, right, which also allowed us more time to also further negotiate, on some of the points that you didn't necessarily agree on with the other colleagues from the other member countries, right? And how do we iron them out? So really for us, I think two things. One is to continuous engagement with the incoming Y20 presidency in particular, right? But also part of the alumni association is to also act as that oversight and accountability mechanism to enable young people like yourself, to continuously come back and say, leadership of the Y20, you've institutionalized the Y20 now, right? Where are we in terms of solidarity, in terms of equality, in terms of sustainability? And what does it look like now, right? I can assure you that certainly solidarity, equality, and sustainability, and some of the core issues that fall under those key issues, would have changed in 3 years and 4 years and 5 years time. So for us, it's also about how do we also pivot according to the context in which we find ourselves in the context of another G20 presidency, but also how do we make sure that again we're able to still track progress on some of the key issues that our young people are still faced with. So I think also it's also going to be a challenge for us in particular as we hand over, and that we will then, I think your question is also in itself, I guess, sort of like pointing us to the how we're going to do it. We've started that work, but also I think next year as the G20 goes to the presidency, we will be seeing how the how is implemented.
Thank you, Moeketsi. Nobutula, we recognize you can ask a question.
Oh, am I audible?
Yes, you're audible.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Moeketsi, for your contribution. Just to add on what you're saying, right, I think in South Africa, we need to move beyond symbolic leadership. So often you see Africa is represented in global spaces, but not really powerful in them. I think we are invited to the conversation, yet our development realities, they remain a footnote in global policy. So I think South Africa chairship should therefore not just be about the representation, but also about the redefinition. I think we must use this platform to reposition Africa, not as a strategic actor in shaping the future of the trade, but also look at it in terms of technology and finance, but not only as a policy taker, but also a policy shaper. So my big concern, is that the youth participation still feels ornamental, if I may say. We are constantly asked to share our views, but we are already given the instrument to influence. So if the G20 is serious about the sustainable growth, I think it's must structurally embed the youth voices in research team, in policy like advisory panels, and in the economic reform agenda itself. I think South African youth, we're not short of ideas, but what we lack is the access to implementation spaces. So we therefore need to contribute to discussion on the digital economy, if I may say, energy transition, and also the reform of the global financial system, the areas where our generation already lives and I think works daily. So my question to G20 as a structure, how will South African G20 chairship practically integrate young expertise into its working groups and also deliverables. Because I think we as young people, we need to move from the audience to the architecture point of view, because our contribution remains rhetorical, not to reform. So I think this chairperson, if this chairpership, I meant to say, if it needs to be remembered, it must be remembered not for the political speeches, but also the embedding a new generational of African thinkers into the machinery of global decision making. Thank you.
Thanks, Noktula. Well said. Raymond, would you like to actually give a response? I think you touched a bit on this, and especially highlighting how the decision was taken by South Africa that you're not going to actually share a communique. Maybe you can just also just elaborate on that again.
No, thanks for the question. I just want to say South Africa is not a bystander, just that I need to say, because, having been involved in this space for now just over 15 years, South Africa has never been a bystander in multilateralism. So South Africa was the first member states in the continent to be part of the G20. Still is, with now an exception of the AU, which is not a country and does not have hosting rights. So South Africa still remains that only one country in the world to host the G20. South Africa also is the only, used to be until 2023, with an expansion of BRICS, the only member states that sit in BRICS. And today, South Africa enjoys what we call the founding members or founding membership of BRICS and its opportunities. It might not be necessarily through the lenses of grassroots at this point. But if you look at something, an institution such as the NDB, the New Development Bank of BRICS, was launched 10 years ago. South Africa is a full member. Full voting rights equals to China, Russia, India, and Brazil. Unlike the IMF, World Bank, where the voting rights are, South Africa has taken Israel to the ICJ, a country that has a bystander status would not necessarily be able to do so. So I just wanted to point out some of the narratives that we are fed by mainstream media, in particular, about the stance of South Africa. Yes, as a country, I believe that we can do more in the international space once we know what we want and we go for it full force. So I think we can there's still some work to be done there, and it's really upon us and our generation to ensure that we advocate for those issues. And then maybe just to get into your question about the symbolic stuff, I mean, it's something that we've been saying, rooting for. When I led the South African delegation to Argentina in 2018 for Y20, we raised it. South Africa raised the establishment of the Y20 Sherpa Council at that time. And it was again supported by a number of member states. In fact, we had a 50-50 vote because we had to put it on vote. That shows that there were significant support for this element. But of course, Y20 works on consensus. But at the time, we had made a decision as a collective during that period that we will work on 2/3 majority. So had we received a 2/3 majority, it would have been launched. But it never did. So it's not something that starts now that we're seeing that this has been symbolic. It's something that has been perpetuating. I mean, I've been involved in the G20 space since 2012, in particular. And we've seen these communiques come and go. And in 2018, as the head of delegation for South Africa, I said, I lobbied through other colleagues and starting with the BRICS member states, of course, and they supported this motion. Another element to show that South Africa is not just a bystander. So we just need to identify what we want, and we gather support from the world. We identified what we want with Israel, and the world rallied behind us. It's just about us having that identity of what is it that we want through these platforms. But let me wrap up this conversation. We have taken this deliberate decision, and I remember when I was doing bilateral with some of the member states, I was very clear about this issue, and I said, guys, we negotiate first, and if we don't find each other, we negotiate. And my last is no sustainability or no institutionalization or permanent mechanism, no communique. And I also had a meeting with a block meeting with all the BRICS member states. And that's where, we rallied through their support. It was myself, the Shepherd, and the co-chair in the secretariat. And we also gave them the same message to say, colleagues, no permanent mechanism, no communique. And of course, we went into negotiations with an open mind. However, people did not even want to even dialogue with the process or with the discussion. And that's where we took these decisions. So as Y20, hence we are putting together structures post the Y20 that would then look at the legacy of what we have done so that it does not just disappear on thin air. So what we have done this year would carry up until we have seen some impact. We've given ourselves 5 years as part of the M&E process that we've introduced, working with some of the UN agencies that will support us on that. So maybe let me pause here to say symbolic communiques and summits and all of that is the end of that for us as the collective leadership of Y20, and we've taken that decision. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Simpiwe, we recognize you. The floor is yours.
Good evening, colleagues. Although I joined a bit late, so what I want to check here is there's any forum or a platform that, for example, it's there to assist young entrepreneurs who want to have maybe access to finance. Why I'm asking this is because I have a huge expertise around that area, because this is what we do. We provide access to finance to young people at a free rate. So I'd like to know, for example, if there are any young people in this platform who might have interest in such portfolios or project, then how do we access them? Because I think it's proper if in this platform also we share such opportunities, because it's what I believe what is lacking. If you look at research, confirms that every business that's been started in South Africa failed within 5 years compared to other African states, of which our mortality rate is very high. And I thought it's a good platform to share this information. If maybe you can give me an idea if there's any platform of that nature. Thank you.
Hi, Simpiwe. No, I like people who are business minded like that. So I'm gonna pop my email address on the chat, so you can just pop me an email. We can probably set up an information session, and then we'll invite all the young people that form part of SABYA, the South African BRICS Youth Association, and of course the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce Youth Association. So to be able to join this kind of event. So I'll share my email address on the group, on the chat. So just take my details and then just pop me an email.
Okay, that will be really appreciated. Thank you very much.
That is awesome. Right, Katlego, the floor is yours.
Thank you and good evening to everyone. Before I get to my question, I just want to also echo Mr. Matlala's sentiments that actually, you know, on an individual level, speaking of now looking at how I've participated in these engagements, the more I participate, the more I get to realize that there is more that I should know so that I can take advantage of these opportunities. So my question is now regarding to the SMMEs. Is the Y20 NKP reach, first of all, and also in their engagements, did we benefit our SMMEs in South Africa should be exposed to such businesses, such opportunities, or such opportunities in the business that would then be available at these engagements.
Sorry, Katlego, who was your question directed to? Apologies, it was a bit I was getting a network issues on my end. Apologies.
To the co-chair. I might not have mentioned that. Yes, to the co-chair.
Moeketsi, please, can you answer?
Thank you. Am I audible, Program Director? Program Director, am I audible?
Yes, you are audible.
Yes, you are.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much, colleagues. Apologies, I'm experiencing some sort of like network delay. I didn't catch the full question, but I think I got what the gist of it in terms of how do small medium enterprises, for example, SMMEs, of which many of them are owned by our young people, can get involved with the Y20. And really, Katlego, as well, your question is also making the case for this Y20 Alumni Association, right? Because also, for us, for example, when we organized our both our pre-summit and even our main summit, right? In terms of procuring services, whether it's audiovisual, whether it is translation services, or whether it is catering and so on. One of the things that we really sought to do as a team was to also make sure how do we, as part of our procurement, for example, right, make sure that we center SMMEs, but also for young people to come in and exhibit, right, to do exhibitions both at our pre-summit, but also even at our main summit. But in addition to that, one of the things that we've also been doing as part of our civil society outreach work is that we generally also partner up, with our social partners on the ground, right? So our civil society outreach work has been twofold in that in terms of partners. So on one end, we've partnered up with the G20 Education Working Group, which has been chaired by the Department of Education and Training. On the other hand, it's been partnering with organizations like the South African Institute of International Affairs, right? And part of that is also saying, how do we bring young people from the surrounding communities, right? Yes, the universities are only used as venue sites, but also we don't also want only university students. We want young people like yourselves who are running SMMEs, right? Who can tell us, in fact, Y20, this is my, policy intervention or meditation, right? Or recommendation when it comes to inclusive economic growth and employment, right? This is what a pathway to prosperity can also look like for another young person who, because we do know, right? I mean, all of us right now in this country are celebrating, and wishing well the young people who are, writing the matric exams, but also next year, January 2026, or, early February, those very young people, not all of them are going to be accepted into institutions of higher education. So how do we also, as part of our thematic area on inclusive economic growth, also amplify and really say to our young people, you've got options, right? You can pivot, right? You can go into the creative economy, right? You can be an entrepreneur, right? You can go into this route. And really, this is much of the work that we have envisaged and that we are imagining can be done by the Y20 Alumni Association, right? So the Y20 Alumni Association would also be that, institutionalization, but, would also offer some of the, programs or programmatic offers that would speak to the heart and the core of SMMEs, and even to circle back to, you know, the young person who came in before you, Katla, who was asking issues around young people who are interested in finance or who are doing financial literacy work and so on, right? It would be interesting even for us as this Y20 to say, how do we also make sure that we know we connect and we are a pathway, right, for our young people to connect with some of these institutions, financial institutions, and what are some of the, you know, co-programmatic areas that we can partner on to make sure that we uplift but also upskill our young people in order to set them up for success as well in your field, Katlego, on SMMEs. Because also it's important to say to our young people, you know, when you're running a small medium enterprise, you know, yes, you are the backbone of the economy, but how do we also equip you with financial literacy, right? Can you read a financial statement as an example, right? And if you can't, how do we upskill you to read a financial statement so that when you make your profit, as an example, you don't go and spend it popping bottles and so on, but you would know that you need to reinvest, you know, in your small MMEs for it to grow. Because also one of the lessons that we learn when we look at entrepreneurship, particularly in this country, is that young people often employ other young people, which is similar to how women, you know, look at what we describe as the informal economy as an example. How women, you know, again have led us in the informal economy, quote unquote, right? In the sense that, you know, we see how women are able to uplift not only their families, but are also able to think about their communities as well, right? If a particular community that you're in as a woman, small business owner, you're also able to take some of your profit and saying, let's address these issues of drugs, let's address these issues of teenage pregnancy and all these social ills, because we know that if there's one industry that welcomes young people, it's the criminal industry. And we as this Y20 Alumni Association, we are trying to shift the tide, particularly in also addressing some of the social ills that our young people are faced with in this country. Program Director.
Thank you, Moeketsi. Well said. Yolanda, no, apologies. It's Boitumelo first. Boitumelo, then Yolanda.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak, and thank you so much for creating the session. I think it's been very informative, and I'm very glad that we have quite a long Q&A session at the end. So I'd just like to quickly ask, in terms of there being no communique, I completely understand the rationale behind that, as well as the creation of the Y20 Alumni Association, which is in the works. I'd like to know, how do we follow up with the process that we've been a part of going forward? Because right now the road is to the G20 and the Y20 has already happened. We've submitted our own input into the G20 as the youth. And so how do we then carry forward our contributions? Because being part of like the UN ECOSOC and being part of putting together documents that can actually be used as a young person, then to assist in NGO spaces, particularly targeted, because there are particular issues that are facing the youth, such as employment, climate risk, as well as many of the points highlighted in our NDCs, which is also a great document to use. How do we then, as youth coming from this Y20 experience, like what can we take away from after the G20 summit, after being a part of this, and say, these are the major points, particularly for South African youth, that we have contributed to the global stage. And this is what we as the South African youth are actually going to do to combat the issue that we have brought up. These are some of the strategies that we've thought out. How do we actually take this experience and turn it into something very practical? It doesn't have to be a policy document, but maybe it can be some kind of rationale that can be shared so that there can be a very strategic way forward coming out of this quite momentous moment where South Africa is on the global stage and people are looking to us, not just for hosting, but also for following up. Like, what will the year after South Africa's G20 presidency look like? And hopefully it's something that is 2 or 3 times more positive, that we can actually not just have the achievement of hosting, but rather have the achievement of hosting and following up on a lot of the contributions that we've made, both in the Y20, T20, and etc. So yeah, that's my quick question. Either of the chair or co-chairs can answer that. We'd just like to know, like, yeah, how do we actually follow up now in a very solid way from this experience?
Thank you, Yolanda. Raymond, I'm picking on you.
Yeah, thanks, Yolanda. I think both Moeketsi and I have spoken quite at length on this, right? From a South African perspective, we have taken a resolution to follow up through the Alumni Association with these legacy projects that will sit under the Alumni Association. As part of because what we want is, we're tired of talk shows and symbolic communiques. And that is why we have discussed with other engagement groups, business, G20, for example, around how do we package those recommendations into policy packs that we can start sharing, not only with government, but together with other agencies. I've mentioned even UN agencies and other international agencies. And on business, is about how do we get more young people involved into businesses. Now there's the Startup 20 initiated in India. Talking with them around how do we amplify this. I know also Startup 20 is proposing the establishment of a secretariat for continuity purposes as well. B20 is also doing the same. But through the Y20 Alumni Association is going to be open to everyone. And that would only be launched at the G20 Social Summit. After that, there will be further communication around how does the membership work. We would then do an interim leadership that will then look into the plan of action for the next year or so. All of those operational issues will then be taken up by the interim leadership. But going forward, the Alumni Association would become the backbone of G20/Y20 activities in the country and in the continent. Thank you.
Thank you, Raymond. Yolanda, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Nonjabulo. Good evening to everyone. Thank you so much for this informative, comprehensive session. My name is Yolanda, and I'm a startup founder of a tech company. So my question is around the digital divide. How is Y20 helping us to address the digital divide, and also for us to be able to, access information that actually pertains to Y20 in terms of tech startups and tech businesses? I ask this question mainly because I do feel that the information is not really easily that much easily accessible based on some of the comments on the group. And also I would like to appeal to the JCCI Youth Commission as well to help us get information on how we can get involved, not only for our businesses, but also from a community, leadership perspective. Thank you all so much. And I think my question is to Moeketsi or whoever can answer. Thank you all so much. Thank you.
It's fine.
I was
I'll
hoping you'd
quickly
say my chair. Oh yes, my chair's here. Thank you, Chair.
It's fine. So thanks for the question. Look, I also need to kind of explain how these processes work, right? So the agenda of the presidency is determined or is spearheaded by the presidency. And what we then do as Y20, we come and say, okay, here's South Africa's priorities, right? because the other thing that you don't want to do is to speak of the priorities of Y20 that don't exist in the presidency. Then there you'll be talking a talk show because nothing is going to get any expression in the declaration. So we aligned ourselves to that. Now, when it comes to the issues of tech and stuff, right? It was not one of the focus areas for this year's presidency. But what has been is AI, and that we're speaking around Y20 is AI, digital technologies, education, and future of jobs. So we looked at those as a thematic area. We looked at that thematic area, and it was led by a lady called Sengwe, who's quite active in the space of AI and digital technologies and the future of work stuff. So when we established the Alumni Association, in line with the need and the program of action, we can expand out of the official group. So this year we had 5. We're focusing only on 5 themes. And even on those 5 themes, some of the themes we had to have at least 2 so that we can have at least about 7 or 8. For example, on inclusive economic development and employment. So when you look at those 2, both of them are separate discussions, but we decided to merge them because we didn't also want to have 10 policy recommendations. 10 thematic areas. And lastly, around information. Look, many of us in this call, perhaps, I would call us a privileged group because we have access to internet, we've got access to Teams as a platform, right? So we also have to take responsibility of seeking information. As young people, we ought not to sit and wait for someone to get the information to us. For example, we all know it's a big thing. G20 blah blah starts from last year, and now we are in November, and we still have a lot of these young people that have got access to these facilities, but choose not to seek that information and wait for someone. We do understand that algorithms also work better. So the kind of the things that you search for, the people that you interact with, and all of that sometimes leads to you. We do understand that there's a large population of young people who do not have access to these facilities and so on. And with that, we have to come up with a sustainable mechanism. For this year alone, due to resources, we only relied on partner organizations to reach out to those people. But for certain grouping, we expect that they are the ones that reach us. They are the one that goes on the website and click on what is G20? How can young people get involved? It will automatically tell you about Y20, and then you go to the website and you get involved. So for I do want to urge colleagues that are in this gathering that do not wait for someone to come feed you with the information. If you are interested and you're eager, after this meeting, go to Google, you'll find a lot of things. And you can then even get involved with organizations that have got direct activities linked to what you are interested in. So I'm going to pack it here. Just go on our website. You will see the 5 thematic tracks that we're doing. We also have the policy pack for all those 5 thematic tracks, which we will share as part of the policy brief pack that we will be doing with the colleagues at G20. Thank you.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Program Director.
Nonjabulo, you're muted. But Lucas, I think you can come on as we wait for Nonjabulo.
Are you guys sure it's a good idea to speak without the chair's permission?
Yes, you can proceed in the interest of time.
Okay. Firstly, I'd like to thank you guys for opening up this platform and giving us the opportunity to engage with you as different stakeholders across the board. My name is Lucas, and I'm a businessman. But more than that, I'm a youth in South Africa. And I'm actually interested in the initiatives that you guys are piloting. But I have a question with regards to the formation of the Y20 Alumni Association. So based off the presentations that's presented by the deputy and the chair, it seems to me that the recommendations that the Y20 makes are never really implemented. And this year was the first year where you guys decided not to really take recommendations. So you guys say that you're going to create this alumni association in order to implement these recommendations, perhaps through policy packs that you guys are going to be giving to G20 members. But the impact that the recommendations have in itself, if a person takes the time to read through them, are very important impact, from climate change to a whole other list of issues which affect the world, not just the youth. So if the Y20 in itself, those recommendations being so important, not being implemented, how is the Alumni Association then going to actually make an impact and implement those recommendations by the Y20? Because at this point, it would seem that the whole Y20 thing is basically, as the chair has said, is a performative thing. You know, a whole lot of time, money, and effort is wasted on nothing, basically. And the formation of the Alumni Association is meant to actually use that money, those resources, to implement the recommendations suggested. And I'm interested in finding out if that actually means that the Y20 basically has no impact, and the only real impact is going to come from the Alumni Association. And if there's going to be a standard of accountability in the Alumni Association for the implementation of the recommendations by the Y20. Thank you.
All right, thanks for that, Lucas. Raymond, back to you.
Thanks, Margaret. Okay, colleagues, I think the questions are the same, just in a different way. So we talk about Y20 a lot because it's the topic of the day. But this is not only new to Y20. This issue of implementation, we have similar problems in BRICS. We have similar problems in AU. We have similar problems in the UN. Now, even what the UN has done is to now have a UN Youth Office. Remember, previously it used to be the UN Youth Envoy under Secretary General. Now there is a UN Youth Office that has been established. There's a UN Youth Office that has been established.
Okay.
I'm getting feedback. Okay. So now the UN has established that, but it's a global challenge that you have youth issues not taken seriously, and all these summits, all of them being a talk show. Now within the Y20 space, we've identified that, and we're saying we want to change it. But in the process of changing it, there are stumbling blocks and there are challenges. But as a form of a start, let's start with an alumni association that built into that. Ultimately, we want all member states to support the establishment of a permanent mechanism for Y20. But since that has not yet happened, let's start somewhere as South Africa to look at what would be feasible. And I don't also want people to think that next year South Africa Alumni Association for Y20 will implement all the policy recommendations. It's not feasible. There is a whole, because as I've said, Y20 is a policy grouping. The countries are the ones that implement, but there are certain issues. For example, the issues of unemployment, right? Because there we're proposing policy changes and policy shifts. Y20 Alumni Association is not able to implement a policy. What Y20 Alumni Association is able to do is to ensure that we advocate and we lobby for those policy changes through a number of things, including legislature, which is parliament. So that is what we have. And when we talk about implementation, that's what we say. So that is how the mechanisms of the Alumni Association would work at this point. Thank you.
All right, thank you for that response, Raymond. And I must say, these questions are so important because I think they lay the foundation of how do we really contribute, how do we form part of the G20 process even going forward. Colleagues, with that being said, we've come to the end of our information session. We are almost 30 minutes over our time, but I think that only indicates how interesting and robust the conversation was. Thank you once more to the Johannesburg Chamber of Commerce for initiating the session. And we look forward as SABYA as well as Y20 to being a part of other relevant conversations relating to young people and their development. With that being said, thank you to the speakers, our chair and co-chair, for really contextualizing what is the G20 presidency about, what is Y20 about, and how do we fit into this picture. With that being said, I will then close the session. I'm not sure, Nanjobulu, if you want to have a last bite. I see you're back on the platform. Thank you.
I have nothing else to say to add on. You've actually given a great close. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to yourself also, Margaret, and everyone who's taken the time to join us. As mentioned on the chat, the link will be available once we publish the webinar. You'll be able to access the recording using the very same link you were accessing the session currently now. And so once we also have our YouTube page up and running, we'll also upload this recording on there. So thank you everyone for taking the time. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Nonjabulo.